Picture a village, a perfect one. Neat stone cottages with roses round the door, a little church, a village green, a pub. Everything exactly as an English village should be, except for one thing. It's empty. The lights never come on at night. No children play on the green. No smoke rises from the chimneys. Walk down the main street at any hour, and you will not meet a single soul. And here's the strangest part. Nothing is ruined. Nothing has been destroyed. The houses are perfect. The people are simply gone all across Britain. There are villages like this. Some are ruins you have to hike to find. Some you can walk into today on a normal afternoon and stand in the middle of an empty street where hundreds of people used to live. Some look completely abandoned and some look perfectly, eerily normal, until you realize you haven't seen a single living person the entire time you've been there. And every one of them raises the same question, a question that turns out to have some very dark and some genuinely surprising answers. Where did everybody go? Because Britain is quietly emptying out, and it has been for a very long time. There are villages here that were taken by the army and never given back. Villages where the people were violently driven from their homes so the land could be given to sheep. Villages you can, right now, buy in their entirety. Every cottage, the pub, the church, all of it, with a single check. And, most unsettling of all, there are villages emptying out today, in our own time, for a reason that has nothing to do with war, or plague, or poverty, and almost no one is talking about it. Before we go looking for the answer, do one quick thing. If you like these forgotten and mysterious corners of Britain, hit that subscribe button now. It's free, it genuinely helps the channel, and it means you'll be here for every one of these journeys. Go on, subscribe, and let's find out where everybody went. And we start with the strangest kind of empty village of all, the kind you can simply buy. Because in North Yorkshire, there is an entire village that has been put up for sale. Not a house, not a farm, the whole village. It's called West Heslington, and it comes complete. More than 40 cottages, a pub, farmland stretching across more than 1,000 acres. An entire living community offered on the open market for a price running into the tens of millions of pounds. For over 150 years, West Heslington was owned, in its entirety, by a single family. Every cottage was a rented home, every tenant a tenant of the same family that had held the estate for generations. And then the last owner died, and her family decided to sell. So the whole village went up for sale as one enormous lot. Imagine being one of the people who actually lives there, renting your home, raising your family, and finding out that your entire village, your neighbours, your pub, your street is being sold to the highest bidder, and that you have no say in who your new landlord will be. West Heslington is not empty of people, but it is empty of something else, control. It's a whole community that belongs completely to somebody else. And West Heslington is not the only one, because this has happened again in the south of England to a village even older and stranger. Down in Hampshire lies the village of Lincolnholt, and it too was sold as a single, complete package. Lincolnholt is almost impossibly picturesque. Around 20 cottages, a manor house, a cricket ground, an old smithy, a village shop, and a church with parts dating back to the 12th century. 900 years of history wrapped up and sold as one estate. Much of the village was rebuilt over a century ago by a wealthy owner, and for decades it was held by a charitable trust before being placed on the market for a fortune. And this is the eerie truth these villages for sale reveal, that in Britain, a village is not always a free community of independent people. Sometimes it is, quite literally, a possession, a thing that can be owned, packaged and sold with the people inside it. These places aren't empty of residents, but they show us the first answer to our question. Sometimes a whole village belongs to one person's whim, and if that person decides the village should change or empty, there is very little the people living there can do about it. But if you want to see a truly empty village, a village with no one in it at all, you have to visit the ones the government took by force and never gave back. On the Dorset coast lies Tyneham, Walk into it today and you'll find a street of roofless stone cottages, open to the sky, a school with the little desks still inside, and a church, and nothing else. No residents, no life. Because in 1943, in the depths of the Second World War, the army needed land to train for the invasion of Europe, and it ordered the entire village of Tyneham to leave. The people were given about a month to pack up their whole lives and go. They went believing with all their hearts that it was temporary, that once the war was won, they would come home. And as they left, one villager pinned a note to the door of the church. It read, "Please treat the church and houses with care. We have given up our homes where many of us lived for generations to help win the war to keep men free. We shall return one day and thank you for treating the village kindly." They never returned. The war ended and the army kept Tyneham. That note is one of the most heartbreaking documents in England, a promise the people made, that was made to them, and that was quietly broken. Tyneham is empty because its people were told to leave for a little while, 80 years ago, and were never allowed back. And the very same thing, the very same year, happened again in the middle of England. In the heart of Salisbury Plain sits the village of Imber. It too was an ordinary farming community with centuries of history. And in 1943, its people were given just 47 days' notice to abandon their homes, so the army could use the village to train American troops. 47 days to leave a village your family had lived in for generations. They left, and Imber was swallowed by the military, and it has stayed that way ever since. A ghost village behind barbed wire, its old houses battered by decades of use as a training ground, open to the public only a handful of days each year. Two villages, Tyneham and Imber, emptied in the same desperate year of war. Their people promised they could return, and neither promise ever kept. That is the second answer to our question. Sometimes a village empties because the state simply decides it needs the land more than the people need their homes. But the emptying of the English village is far older than any war. Out on the lonely chalk hills of the Yorkshire Wolds lies a place that shows just how long this has been happening. It's called Wareham Percy, and it is the most famous deserted medieval village in Britain. Today there is almost nothing left. The roofless shell of a church and a series of strange humps and hollows in the grass where the houses once stood. But 600 years ago, this was a busy, thriving village, home to families for generations. And then it died. First came the Black Death, the Great Plague that wiped out huge numbers of the population. And then came something that would echo down the centuries. The landlords realized that sheep were worth more than tenants. So the surviving villagers were cleared off the land to make way for grazing flocks. The houses were left to fall in, and the fields swallowed the streets. Wareham Percy is proof that the story we are following, people cleared out so the land could make more money, is not a modern problem at all. It is one of the oldest stories in Britain, and it was about to be repeated on a horrifying scale. In the mountains of the north, those mountains hold the darkest and largest emptying of the British countryside. A deliberate campaign that cleared thousands of villages from the map of Scotland. They are called the Highland Clearances. In the 18th and 19th centuries, across the Scottish Highlands, landowners discovered that sheep were far more profitable than people. And so, in a process that lasted for generations, they evicted the families who had farmed these glens for centuries. Tens of thousands of people, driven from their homes, often brutally. Cottages were pulled down and set on fire, sometimes with the family's possessions still inside, to make sure they could never return. Whole communities were forced out to the harsh coasts, or onto emigrant ships bound for Canada and Australia, or simply left destitute, and the glens they left behind fell silent. To this day, if you walk the remote highlands, you will come across them everywhere. The heartbreaking outlines of abandoned villages, grass-covered foundations, roofless gable ends, the ghosts of whole townships, standing empty in the most beautiful and lonely landscapes in Britain, emptied not by war, not by disease, but by pure profit. And one of these cleared villages tells a story so harsh, it is almost impossible to believe. Perched on the very edge of a cliff on the far northeast coast of Scotland was a settlement called Badbeer. When the people were cleared off the good, fertile land inland to make way for the sheep, some of them were pushed out here, to a strip of land so steep, so exposed, and so close to the cliff edge that it was barely habitable at all. They scratched out a living on this brutal cliff top, battered by the North Sea winds. And the winds were so ferociously strong that, according to the accounts that survive, the people of Badbeer had to tether their livestock, and even their own children, to posts and rocks with ropes to stop them from being blown clean off the cliff and into the sea while the adults worked. Imagine that. A family tying a rope around their child so the wind wouldn't take them over the edge. Eventually, life at Badbeer became impossible, and the people abandoned it and emigrated. Today there is only a lonely stone monument on the cliff top, built by the son of one of the villagers, listing the names of the families who once clung to life on that terrible edge. Badbeer stands empty because its people were driven to a place where human beings were never meant to live at all. And in one great northern valley, the clearances turned to something close to atrocity. In the sweeping valley of Strathnarver in Sutherland, hundreds of families were cleared from their homes in the early 1800s in a series of evictions so brutal they scarred Scotland's memory forever. Witnesses described the factor and his men moving through the townships, turning families out into the open, and then setting fire to the roofs and timbers of their homes so that nothing remained to come back to. In one infamous account, an old woman too frail to be moved was still inside her cottage when it was set alight around her. The people of Strathnarver watched their entire world burn in a single season, the smoke of their homes rising all along the valley, and then they were gone, scattered to the coast and the emigrant ships. Today, Strathnarver is one of the emptiest, most beautiful and most haunted feeling places in all of Britain. A vast green valley, almost silent, dotted with the ruins of the townships that were burned, where thousands once lived and now almost no one does. And across the islands of the west, the same silence fell. On the Isle of Skye lie the twin cleared villages of Bororag and Suisnish, once thriving crofting communities, now just scatters of ruined stone houses beside the sea, emptied in the clearances of the 1850s, their people evicted and shipped away. And on the neighbouring island of Rasay lies Hallaig. Perhaps the most famous of all the cleared villages, its emptiness, so haunting that it inspired one of the greatest poems in the Gaelic language. A poem that imagines the long-gun people of the village still walking among the trees, a ghostly community of the vanished. These places are more than ruins. They are memorials to an entire way of life that was deliberately erased. Walk into them, and you can still trace the shape of the homes, the walls of the old fields, the paths worn by feet that have been gone for a century and a half. The people didn't leave. They were taken away, and the silence they left behind has never lifted. And then there is the ultimate empty village, the one where the people themselves finally chose to go. Far out in the Atlantic, more than 40 miles beyond the Outer Hebrides, lies the remote archipelago of St Kilda. For 2,000 years, the most isolated inhabited place in all of Britain. Its people lived a life like no other, scaling towering sea cliffs to hunt seabirds, cut off from the world for months at a time. But by the early 20th century, that ancient way of life was collapsing. Disease brought in by visitors, young people leaving for the mainland, and terrible winters had worn the community down to almost nothing. And so, in 1930, the last 36 St Kildans made a heartbreaking decision. They asked to be taken away. On the morning of the evacuation, they left open Bibles on the tables of their empty homes, closed the doors, and boarded a ship, leaving forever the only home their people had ever known. St Kilda is empty today because a 2,000-year-old community simply reached the end and let go. The village street still stands, a curving row of roofless houses facing the sea, and no one has lived in them since. and the emptying never really stopped. It just slowed to a whisper. All across the remotest parts of Britain, there are hamlets today that have quietly dwindled down to a mere handful of people, and in some cases to almost no one at all. In the far northwest of Scotland lies the emptiest county in the whole country, where you can drive for miles through breathtaking scenery and pass barely a single soul. A landscape that once held thriving communities in every glen, and now holds mostly sheep, deer and ruins. There are little settlements scattered across the highlands and the islands where the school closed decades ago, where the last shop shut years back, and where a single elderly resident or one lone family keeps a light burning in a place that once held dozens. These are not dramatic evacuations. The young leaving for the cities because there is no work and no future. The old ones dying and no one coming to replace them, until a village that was full of voices for 1,000 years falls, at last, almost completely silent. And there is one more way Britain emptied its villages: by drowning them on purpose. As the great industrial cities grew, they needed vast amounts of fresh water, and the cheapest way to get it was to dam a remote valley and flood it, turning it into a reservoir. In the 1890s, deep in the mountains of Mid Wales, the beautiful Elan Valley was chosen to supply water to the distant city of Birmingham. Farms, homes, a school, a chapel, and the great houses of the valley, an entire living community, were cleared out and then submerged forever beneath the rising water. The people were moved on, and only the landowners were properly compensated. The ordinary tenants simply lost their homes and their world. And it happened again and again across Britain. Valley communities emptied and drowned so that a faraway city could turn on its taps. To this day, in times of drought, the water in some of these reservoirs drops low enough that the drowned villages rise back into view. A broken wall, a bridge, the foundations of a farm, grey and dripping in the sunlight, a whole community briefly returning from beneath the water before it sinks away again. So we have our answers: villages emptied by the army, by the clearances, by plague, by flood, by isolation, and by simple slow decline. Villages owned and sold like objects. Every one of them a piece of Britain's past. But here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Because the strangest emptying of the British village is not history at all. It is happening right now in our own time, and the cause is something no one saw coming. Go to some of the most beautiful villages in Britain today. In Cornwall, in the Lake District, in the coast and countryside of Wales, and in the depths of winter, you will find something eerie. The cottages are perfect. The village looks like a postcard, but at night, street after street of houses stands completely dark. No lights, no cars, no smoke from the chimneys. The school has closed because there aren't enough local children. The shop has closed, and the pub, because for half the year there aren't enough local people to keep them open. These villages are not ruined and they are not for sale. They are simply empty because the houses are no longer homes. They have been bought up, one by one, as second homes and holiday lets owned by people who live somewhere else and visit for a few weeks a year. In some of these villages, the majority of the houses now sit empty for most of the year. The local families who used to live in them have been priced out completely, unable to compete with wealthy buyers, forced to move away to find somewhere they can actually afford. And so a strange new kind of ghost village has been born, not empty because of a disaster, but hollowed out quietly by money. A place that looks full of life in a photograph and is dead as a graveyard on a wet Tuesday in January. This is the emptying that people are only just beginning to talk about. In parts of Wales, in Cornwall, in the Lake District, the numbers have become staggering. Villages where well over half the houses are now second homes or holiday lets standing empty for most of the year. Picture it in the depth of winter, a whole seaside village where you can walk the length of the main street after dark and count the lit windows on one hand, where the car park is empty, the pub is shut until Easter, and the only sound is the wind. The chip shop has a note in the window saying it'll reopen in spring. The primary school has closed for good because there were only a handful of local children left to fill it. The people who cut the hair, drove the buses, ran the shop, crewed the lifeboat. The people who actually made the place a community have gone because they could no longer afford to live in the village their families had lived in for generations. Some communities have grown so angry and so desperate that they've begun taxing second homes heavily or trying to block new holiday home sales altogether in a fight to keep their villages alive. But the tide is hard to turn. And it is spreading, village by village. In the loveliest parts of the country, the real community drains away, leaving behind beautiful, silent shells that light up for a few weeks in summer and then go dark again. Whole communities are quietly disappearing, not because anyone forced them out with soldiers or fire, but because a village became a luxury that ordinary local people could no longer afford to live in. And that is the real answer to our question. Where did everybody go? Sometimes the army took them. Sometimes the landlords burned them out. Sometimes the sea and the centuries wore them down. And sometimes, right now, in villages you could drive to this afternoon, they were simply, quietly priced out of existence. And the lights went off one house at a time until there was almost no one left to notice. So the next time you find yourself in a perfect, quiet British village, and you notice how still it is, how few lights are on, how you haven't seen a single child or heard a single voice, stop for a moment and ask yourself the question that has haunted this whole journey. Where did everybody go? If you found this as fascinating as we did, please subscribe. It really does help us keep making these, and we'll see you on the next one, because all across Britain, the lights are going out in the villages, one window at a time, and most people never even notice until they're standing in a street where no one lives at all.